Have you ever wondered where those classic fairy tales really came from? You might be surprised to learn they weren't just made up for entertainment. They hold deep roots in ancient myths, folklore, and even reflect the anxieties of the times they were born. Think of the stories you grew up with: Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Little Red Riding Hood. They sparkle with magic, courage, and happily ever afters. But behind the glitter and fairy dust lies a much darker and deeper history. These tales are not just whimsical bedtime stories. They are echoes of ancient fears, survival instincts, and societal values. In this exploration, we'll journey back in time, long before Disney, where fairy tales were not only meant to entertain but to warn, to educate, and to explain the world. We'll uncover how these tales evolved from myth to folklore, discover the powerful symbolism woven into them, and explore how they continue to shape storytelling today. From myths to folklore, the seeds of fairy tales. To understand where fairy tales come from, we must first look to ancient myths. Long before books, humanity passed wisdom through stories, spoken, memorized, and retold across generations. In ancient times, myths explained natural events, like why the sun rose or why seasons changed. The Greek myth of Persephone and Hades, for instance, not only told of love and betrayal, but also served as an explanation for the cycle of the seasons. The tale of Pandora's box explored the origins of human suffering and hope. These myths weren't just stories, they were lessons wrapped in narrative. As civilizations evolved, so did their storytelling. Ancient myths merged with local folklore, becoming more personalized and practical. These stories were passed on by word of mouth, often told around fires in villages. Oral tradition gave rise to many tales we now recognize as fairy tales. In Europe, during the Middle Ages, tales were shared to both amuse and educate. These early versions were not the child-friendly renditions we know today. They were grim, violent, and often deeply moralistic. For instance, in older versions of Cinderella, the stepsisters mutilated their own feet to fit the glass slipper, only to have birds peck out their eyes as punishment. One of the most significant contributors to the preservation of these tales was the brothers Grimm, Jacob, and Wilhelm. In the early 19th century, they collected and published Grimm's fairy tales, a compilation of Germanic stories they believed were remnants of a shared cultural past. But even they edited many stories over time to make them more palatable for children. Still, their collection was rich with themes of survival, justice, family, and social hierarchy, revealing much about the values and fears of the societies from which these tales sprang. The power of symbolism, unraveling fairy tale motifs. One reason fairy tales have endured for centuries is their use of powerful and universally resonant symbols. From magical objects to archetypal characters, these motifs help communicate complex ideas in a simple, memorable way. The wicked stepmother, for example, is a recurring figure. She appears in Snow White, Cinderella, and even in more obscure tales. But why is she so prevalent? Psychologists suggest she represents the fear of maternal abandonment or the presence of real tensions within blended families. Symbolically, she becomes a stand-in for any force that disrupts childhood's safety and love. Magical objects, be it a glass slipper, a spinning wheel, or a magic mirror, often serve as catalysts for change. These items are not just plot devices, they symbolize transformation, fate, or the inner magic of the protagonist. In Sleeping Beauty, the spindle that pricks Aurora's finger can be interpreted as a metaphor for puberty and the dangers of coming of age. Another common motif is the hero's journey, a structure Joseph Campbell famously detailed. Fairy tales often follow a character who starts in ordinary circumstances, faces trials, receives help, often magical, and returns transformed. Little Red Riding Hood embarks on a journey through the forest, a symbol of the unknown and danger, learning lessons that reflect the perils of naivety and the importance of wisdom. What makes these symbols so enduring is their connection to universal human emotions: fear, love, jealousy, ambition, and hope. They speak a symbolic language that transcends culture and time, and they offer frameworks for understanding life's mysteries and moral questions. Fairy tales and the evolution of storytelling. Over the centuries, fairy tales have morphed, shifted, and adapted to the values of each generation. While their core themes remain intact, their presentation has evolved dramatically. In the Victorian era, tales were sanitized to match moral expectations of the time. The Brothers Grimm revised their earlier editions to remove overt sexuality and increase religious elements. Later, authors like Hans Christian Andersen brought a more poetic and melancholic tone to the genre, as seen in tales like The Little Mermaid or The Snow Queen. Fast forward to the 20th century, and fairy tales entered the age of film. Walt Disney reimagined these old stories with bright colors, cheerful songs, and optimistic endings. His adaptations of Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty became defining versions for new generations. But these adaptations often softened the darkness of the originals to suit modern sensibilities and mass entertainment. In literature, writers have continued to reinterpret fairy tales for adult audiences. Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber retells traditional tales with feminist twists. Neil Gaiman's stories frequently echo fairy tale structures, but with modern horror and moral ambiguity. Even today, fairy tales are everywhere. In TV shows like Once Upon a Time, in films like Shrek or Into the Woods, and in books like The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer, which reimagines classic tales in futuristic settings. What remains consistent is the fairy tale's ability to evolve. Whether used to uphold tradition or challenge it, these stories remain flexible vessels for human meaning. Conclusion: the enduring legacy of fairy tales. So, what can we learn from the real origins of fairy tales? First, they remind us of our shared human heritage. Across cultures and centuries, people have turned to stories to make sense of the world, to pass on wisdom, and to inspire the next generation. Whether it's an ancient myth about the gods, a cautionary tale told by the fire, or a modern reimagining in a movie theater, these stories connect us. Second, fairy tales are powerful tools of education and transformation. Their symbols, however simple they may seem, carry deep meanings. They teach us about resilience, justice, love, and the dangers that lurk in the unknown. They help children understand complex emotions, and adults revisit the challenges of growing up. Finally, fairy tales endure because they adapt. They are not relics of the past, but living narratives that grow with us. As our world changes through technology, politics, and culture, so too do the tales we tell. And in that evolution, fairy tales continue to guide us, entertain us, and help us imagine new possibilities. So next time you hear the words, "Once upon a time," ask yourself, what truth lies behind the tale? What message has traveled through time, hidden in the folds of fantasy? Because fairy tales are more than bedtime stories. They are humanity's oldest way of telling the truth, through wonder, magic, and metaphor.